Hello everyone. In today's video, I'm going to set up a simple CI/CD pipeline which uses Terraform for infrastructure as a code, GitHub for continuous integration, and Jenkins for continuous deployment onto an AWS environment. I am currently running Jenkins in a Docker container where I created a custom image, and within this image I downloaded the Terraform CLI as well as AWS and Docker. Like I said, doing it this way, running Jenkins in a Docker container, will give it access to Docker itself based on the way I create the image, and also we can build and deploy containers straight from the Jenkins job. Again, like I said, we'll also install Terraform inside Jenkins to make sure that it's ready for infrastructure as a code. So here is what our setup looks like. We have a Docker file here, and then we also have a Docker Compose file. So let me just close the Docker Compose file, and start with the Docker file. So we're using the official Jenkins image as a base, and then we're switching to root, and then we're installing our dependencies. Then we install Terraform, and then we add Jenkins as a user, as a Docker group user. Then we switch right back to Jenkins. So that's how we're able to create our Docker file. So now let's take a look at the Docker Compose file. We have two services here, the Jenkins Docker and my Jenkins. So to begin here with the first service, Jenkins Docker, as you can see, here's the image right here. And this runs the daemon using Docker inside Docker. We also need privileged true, because it allows Docker to run inside the container. And then we also set a few volumes here. We expose these ports, and then we created a network called Jenkins, and we also gave it an alias. Similarly, for the next service, my Jenkins, it uses the previous image to build. We create a container out of this image called my Jenkins, and we restarted on failure. We set the environment, and we create a few volumes as well. We expose this two ports 8080 because this is the default Jenkins port 8080, and we can also change it if we would like. And we're also utilizing this port 50,000 as well in the same network as we did before. So with this, we're ready to run our Docker image. So we can achieve this by typing Docker Compose up. I put a flag of -d to run it in detached mode. And to just make sure that our Jenkins image is built fresh, I'll type a flag of --build and hit enter. So we're just gonna pull the official Docker image, and once it's done pulling, it's gonna start the containers. I'm just gonna expand this, and I'll pause it, and then I'll come back once it's completely pulled. So as we can see, our network and containers have been built. So if I were to type in Docker PS, here you can see our containers, my Jenkins and the image my Jenkins and the Docker dind image we created, and these are the containers which are also running. So from here, I'm able to log in to Jenkins UI using localhost. Usually you'd have to do a little bit of a setup. You'd have to do an initial password, and then you create a username, also with your email. But because I've been working on Jenkins, I already created that, but it's pretty easy. You just have to exec into the Docker container and then pull that password, and then you're able to register your email, and then you're ready to start working with Jenkins. Um, Here's just a simple pipeline I created. I'll create a new one. So it's called a job. So if I go back to the home page, I can hit new item, and I'll just give it an example of sample. Then from here, I'll just click pipeline and click OK. Then, without giving it any descriptions, I'll try a sample pipeline for Hello World. Press enter. As you can see, it's the Jenkins file here. It's in Groovy. So if I click save and I hit build now, and then if I go back, here's our build number, our first build one, in our sample pipeline, and I can click on this build number. I can go to the console output. As you can see, it started by me, and then the first command, which was just to run hello world, and then it finished with a success. So in a nutshell, that's how you run Jenkins in a Docker container. What we've done here is pretty much how it works together. Jenkins runs in a container, and when a job needs to build a Docker image, it connects to, I say job meaning a Jenkins job. It connects to a Docker image, to the Docker daemon running in the Jenkins container. Because we installed Terraform, you can also run infrastructure deployments as part of a pipeline, all inside of Jenkins. So yeah, that's how you are able to achieve running Jenkins in a Docker container. And I'll see you shortly as we proceed in our project. Probably to set up a webhook, or maybe we'll do that at the end. But I'll see you shortly, nonetheless. So moving on in our project, in order to work with Jenkins, Jenkins is very much plugin specific. Basically, meaning that if you're working with other technologies while using Jenkins, you'll have to install the plugins for those technologies or else Jenkins, your pipeline will fail. So, in order for our pipeline to be a success, there's a few plugins that we're gonna have to install. I already have them installed, but I'm just going to show you which plugins we're gonna need and how to install plugins in general. So if you go to Manage Jenkins here, and then under System Configuration, here's plugins. You want to click on this. Here, these are just some plugins which need to be updated. But what you want to do here is go to available plugins. Here you can search for whichever plugin it is that you need. In our case, we need pipeline, plugin, AWS credentials plugin, Git plugin, GitHub plugin, and credentials binding plugin. So, for example, if I go here to install plugins and I search for AWS credentials, here you see the AWS credentials plugin, which is already installed and enabled. So just make sure that you install those plugins before you proceed, or else Jenkins will just notify you that you might have to install those. So once those plugins have been installed, if I go back here to settings, the next thing I might or you will have to do is um, work with some credentials. So right now I deleted every credentials I had just because I wanted to set them up with everybody here. So if I go here to system, global credentials, and if I add credentials, here I'm going to call the ID AWS dash creds. Make sure you take a note of whatever you call this ID here. And for description, I'm just gonna say authenticate Jenkins file with AWS. And then for the access key, here this is where you'd want to um, type in your AWS access key ID and secret key. So I'm just going to do that. And I'm also going to put in my secret key. And then I'll click on create. So yeah, so these AWS credentials have been set up, and we're gonna use this in our Jenkins file to authenticate with our AWS environment. So just make sure that you have those credentials set up, so when we're working, you don't have any other issues. Then next, we're going to set up a Git repository for our source control, and then we're going to set up a webhook to authenticate Jenkins with that repository. So whenever we push code into that Git repository, our Jenkins job then checks out this code and performs the changes on our AWS environment. So moving on now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to GitHub. Here we will create a new repository, and we're going to call this repository dev infra CI/CD. And for the description, we're going to say this repo is to deploy Terraform code onto AWS using a Jenkins CI/CD pipeline. You can do whatever you want for this. It doesn't really matter. I think this is just a broad description of what we're trying to achieve. I'm gonna add a README, and I'll just hit create repository. I'll leave it as public and create repo. Now we have our repository. Next thing that I'm going to do is here, I'm going to go back into Jenkins, go back home, and then I'll create our project. And I'm gonna call it dev infra. I called this repository CI/CD, so CI/CD just to keep that uniformity. And I'll click on pipeline, and then I'll click on OK. I'll give this a description of this pipeline checks out can't spell out code from GitHub and deploys it to AWS from GitHub after webhook is triggered and deploys into AWS. So for build, for triggers, we're going to click on GitHub hook trigger, and then pipeline script, we're going to do pipeline from source code management. Here it's asking what kind, so we're going to hit git. Then we have to provide our repo URL. So what we're going to do here is we'll go back to GitHub and we'll copy this URL, go back to Jenkins, paste it. And then for credentials, we're going to add credentials. So Jenkins. For username, I'm going to use my GitHub username, which is Albangua. And then for password, we're going to create a token. So if I go back to Jenkins, to GitHub, and if I go to settings, right here. And then if I scroll all the way down to developer settings, then here I can go on personal access tokens and classic. I can here generate a new token, classic, and I'll use this token to authenticate with Jenkins. And then I'll leave expiration for 30 days, and I'll click all this boxes to give this token the proper permissions. No, it's a little tedious, but you gotta do it. And then click on generate token. Here's my token. So I'm going to copy this token, head back to Jenkins, and I'll paste it here. And I'm just gonna call this GitHub. Give it the description. This token authenticates Jenkins with GitHub user. And now click add. And there we go. We have this pipeline authenticated with that repo. One thing we have to make sure is we use the proper branch. I'm going to use main, even though we're gonna be using a branch called infra, short for infrastructure. I'm leaving main just because I actually do not want it to deploy onto that branch. I'll explain later once you take a look at what we're gonna be achieving. So if not, you can just do whatever you want here. You can leave it as main. You can change it to development or production, whatever works best for you and your GitHub repository. Then you want to make sure that wherever you have your Jenkins file, you want to implement the correct path, because I'm going to have the Jenkins file at the root of our path. We don't need to change anything else. So this right here is proper. And then I'll click and apply and save. So if I did build now and I went back, I took a look at the logs. As you can see, it checked out this GitHub repo here, but because we don't have anything in it, the pipeline obviously failed, and the error was unable to find Jenkins file from Git. So everything is right where we need it to be. The next thing that we're gonna do here is to set up a webhook such that once we push code, then Jenkins triggers automatically. So moving on, what we're gonna do now is to set up a webhook with our GitHub repo. So back here in the GitHub page, you want to go to settings, and then webhooks, add webhook. I'm just gonna sign in. It's gonna ask you to sign in. I'm just gonna use my password because I have it saved, and confirm. And then for under payload URL, here you just want to replace this with your Jenkins URL, which would be this. But because I'm using localhost 8080, so I'm gonna utilize this software called ngrok, which forwards the HTTP requests to it, and then it in turn forwards it back to Jenkins. So I'm gonna do that by starting a terminal, and then I think the command is ngrok http, and then the port. And press enter. and then it's gonna start it. And then it gives you an address here. So just copy this address, and then you'd want to take it back here to GitHub and paste it. But then you want to add a slash GitHub dash webhook slash, and then click on add webhook. Don't save. And then it's just going to tell you this webhook has never been triggered. So if you just click away from webhooks and click back, it should give you this tick mark saying last delivery was successful. So we have successfully configured a webhook with Jenkins to our repo. So the next thing we're gonna do is take a look at our Jenkins file and just a brief walkthrough of what our code is trying to achieve. And we're also gonna take a look at our Terraform code to see what we're trying to deploy on AWS. So let's get to it. So we're gonna move on now. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back here into my repository, and then I'll copy the code. And then I'm gonna switch to my Visual Studio Code. Just check my directory, and then I'm going to paste. But first I'll do a git clone. I'll clone that directory, and then I'll open it. And it's dev info CI/CD. So I'm gonna open folder. So we're currently in that directory here. And then I'm going to just paste a few of the Terraform code that I've been working on so we can take a look at what we're going to be deploying. So now we have our Terraform code in here. If you take a look at the main.tf, but first let's take a look at the modules. So we're going to be creating a NAT gateway. As you can take a look, and then that gateway is going to sit in this VPC. I'm creating a VPC as well, and just some security groups as well. I have a series where I explain exactly how to create these resources on AWS using Terraform. So if you're interested, it's going to be on my channel. And then we have the main directory here where it's going to be pulling the code from. Moving on, next thing we have to do is create our Jenkins file. And now we have a Jenkins file created. Just remember that you have to create it at the root of your directory, or if you create it anywhere else, you have to specify it within the settings in Jenkins UI. So when creating your Jenkins file, the first thing, or the first argument, is always pipeline. So I'm going to type in pipeline in curly braces. I'm going to specify an agent for any. This basically means that we should run this pipeline on any available Jenkins agent. So next, we have to set a few environment variables. So I'm going to start by typing in environment in curly braces. And the first environment variable I'm going to set will be the Terraform working directory. So I'm going to do this by typing tf underscore working underscore dir. And it's going to be this path here where we can find our main file. So what I'm going to do is just copy this relative path, close this, go back to our Jenkins file, and I'll paste that in there. So basically, this is the path to our Terraform project. The next environment variable will be our AWS default region. So it's going to be AWS underscore default underscore region. And I'm going to set it as US East 2 because that's where I work out of. You can set this to whatever makes sense to you. So the next argument, you gotta be careful with the curly braces. It's gonna be options. So basically this, hold on, let me type it and then I'll explain it. It's gonna, I think it says skip stages after unstable. So this argument basically says if a stage is marked as the build is unstable, then just skip all the rest of the stages. And like I said, you always have to be careful with your indentation when working with Groovy. So our first stage, for stages, our first stage in our pipeline is going to be to check out the code. So it's going to be check out from source code management. So I'm going to call this stage checkout. And the first step will be checkout SCM. So basically this means we're asking Jenkins to pull the latest code from the same Git repository or branch which triggered the Jenkins job. Okay, now moving on, our next stage would be to set our AWS credentials. So another stage argument. And we're gonna call this stage set AWS credentials. I think that's a good name. And then the first step for this stage, we have to type in this keyword with credentials. So everything that happens in this stage needs to happen with credentials. So basically we're asking Jenkins to inject AWS credentials to store it into this environment. So with credentials, I think we're gonna do is 2 square braces and then enter. So everything that happens in here has to happen with credentials. So the first argument is gonna be with class. Just gonna make sure I don't do any errors here. And it's gonna be Amazon Web Services credentials binding. And then the next argument is gonna actually be the credentials ID. So remember when we, in our Jenkins, so let me go back to Jenkins. If I go to credentials, so remember when we created our credentials, we called our ID AWS creds. So I'm just gonna copy this. And then I'm going to go back to code, colon, and I'll paste it in here. Sure not to make any errors. The next argument is going to be our AWS access key variable. So it's going to look like this. Access key. And it's going to be our AWS access key ID. So our next argument for our AWS credentials block here would be secret key variable. And we're gonna type in the value as AWS secret access key. Make sure to remember to put it in quotes if you forget. And then what we're gonna do next is we're just gonna have Jenkins echo and state AWS credentials have been set in the environment. So we're gonna type in AWS credentials have been set in the environment. Okay, so moving on now, our next stage would be to initialize Terraform. So right here, I'm gonna type in stage, and then I'm going to call it Terraform init. But I need to make sure to put it in quotes. And then the first step would be, basically we're asking it to change, we're gonna ask it to change the working directory to this directory that we set here. And we're gonna do this by typing dir for directory and then this working directory value right here, like so. And then obviously we have to pass in our shell commands, but first I need to, okay, making an error. So we're gonna do shell command. First we're gonna ask it to list all files in this directory. So ls la needs to be in quotes for the shell script. And then another shell command, and it's gonna be our Terraform init in this Terraform working directory which we had set, which is this path right here. So now moving on to our next stage, Our next stage would be to validate and format. So I'm going to type in stage validate and format. Just make sure to put it in quotes. And our first step, the curly brace, we're going to set that same directory. So this same directory, open our curly brace, and we're gonna type in our shell commands within this directory. So Terraform, validate, and then another shell command asking Terraform to format FMT. Then we set a flag of recursive. Basically, this means to format all Terraform files in this directory. Our next argument or next stage will be our Terraform plan stage. So we're gonna type in stage in the bracket Terraform plan, and then like we've been doing before, steps, making a slight error. And then steps. You gotta be careful with those braces because they're tricky. So in this stage, we have to re-inject our AWS credentials before running Terraform plan. So basically what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to copy this block of code. And I'm going to go here, press enter, go all the way to the beginning and paste it. So we have the same credentials like we did in the set credentials stage. And at the very end, I'm gonna open a new curly brace. And just make sure everything is okay. And then I'm gonna type in the shell command. Terraform plan dash var dash file equals terraform dot tf vars. So let me just explain what this means. So we're basically saying this to create an execution plan showing what will be created, what has been changed, and what will be destroyed. This is basically what this command here is saying. So in our next stage is going to be our Terraform apply stage. So stage And we're gonna put a flag of when branch is main. So we're basically saying we're only applying into our environment when the branch the code has been pushed to is equals to main, to the main branch. For you, it could be dev or prod or just whatever that branch is called. Just make sure you have it here if you're gonna use this method. And then the steps. It's gonna be the same command because we're loading in this directory. So we're gonna copy this and I'll paste it here, and then I'm gonna type in a message, so input message. So we're gonna say something like approve Terraform apply. In the comma, okay, colon, and then apply. Then the next shell command will be Terraform apply flag auto approve dash var dash file equals terraform dot tf vars. So let me explain what this means. So basically we're saying this applies the Terraform plan without any interactive approval, because we can't approve a pipeline that's already running. So it would have to, or we can, but we're gonna have to set it in the Jenkins UI. So we're gonna do some post. So post actions are once the pipeline has run successfully. These are just a few actions that we want to carry out after the pipeline has been run successfully. So for our post actions, we're gonna come all the way out and type post. And in curly braces, we're gonna put a block of always. And then we're gonna echo. So we're gonna tell it to always echo out pipeline complete. So at the end of our pipeline, regardless if it fails or not, it's gonna echo out pipeline complete. And then if it passes, we're gonna echo Terraform apply succeeded. But in case of a failure, we're gonna echo out Terraform apply failed. I'm just gonna put these in caps. So yeah, so this is gonna be our pipeline. The next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna save and commit these changes, and it should trigger our CI/CD pipeline. So I'll go to File, Save All, and then to the source here, add it, Jenkins, File, and Terraform configurations. Commit, sync the changes. So our pipeline ran successfully. So if we take a look at the console output, you can see here it says started by GitHub push by myself, and then obtained Jenkins file from Git, and then it's running in this workspace. So if we scroll all the way down through the logs, we can start to see our commands. So first we had the AWS credentials have been set. These are the credentials that we set. And then remember we tapped in to list all files within that Terraform directory. And then initialize within that directory. So these are the files that were in that directory. And then if you keep scrolling down, you can see the next command, Terraform validate, was a success. Terraform format, it formatted the main.tf. And then Terraform plan, it prints out the Terraform plan just like it would on your local. And these are all the resources that we're creating within our AWS environment all the way down. So if I go to our AWS environment and log in, and I go to VPC, once it loads, it's acting really slow today. And if I look at the VPCs, there we have our dev info app CI/CD VPC. And if I go to NAT gateway, that's our NAT gateways we created within our Terraform file. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's how you design and create a simple CI/CD pipeline which uses Terraform for infrastructure as a code, GitHub for version control, and Jenkins for CI/CD, continuous employment and continuous deployment, to deploy some resources onto AWS. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next lesson.